afternoon, everybody. My name's Alex Mayer and I'm your Labour member of the European Parliament. And it is... And what a fantastic turnout. It is great to see all of you here, and it is great to welcome John and Jeremy back here to Norfolk. Now, I was actually last with Jeremy just on Thursday in Brussels. Theresa May was definitely getting the cold shoulder from European leaders. Jeremy, on the other hand, was talking to an absolutely packed auditorium, people cheering him from the rafters, including lots of prime ministers from different European countries. And I can also report that it would appear that now all of Europe knows the Oh Jeremy Corbyn song as well. Now, it's just 4 months since we had the general election, and it is clear that the Tories are completely out of ideas. Losing the vote on universal credit, and here in Norwich and across Norfolk, we can see that things are going downhill. Sacking our PCSOs, job losses at RAF Marham, and now we've even got Coleman's mustard under threat, haven't we? And that is why I am so pleased that the Labour Party is taking our part of the world seriously, and that we've got Jeremy and John who are actually bringing hope to places like Norfolk and hope to all of Britain. And therefore it's my great pleasure to welcome John McDonnell to first start and address us, the next Chancellor of Britain. Thank you.
Mic working? Yes, good. There was a constituency meeting a few weeks ago where I said, can you hear me at the back? And someone shouted out, regrettably, yes. I'm feeling decidedly scruffy, and I apologise. It's only about 2 hours ago. Some of you know I sail on the Broads, and I have a mooring and a boat on the Broads. So 2 hours ago, in advance of Hurricane Brian, I was bailing out one of my dinghies. Not very successfully. So if you hear of a massive sinking at the weekend, you'll know it's me. Let me just say this, very, very briefly, because we want to have a proper discussion and questions and answer about where we go from here. But I said this at Labour Party conference. Before the general election, we were 24 points behind in the polls. People gave us no chance whatsoever, and a number of us were saying, these polls will change and we will shock people. We will shock them. And we said that for a reason. We said there'd be 2 things would happen. One, first of all, when we go to a general election campaign, legally the broadcasters are obliged to give us some semblance of fair coverage. And that's what happened. And I said, once we get that, they will see, first of all, what Jeremy Corbyn is really about. The honest and decent and principled and strong leader that he is. And that's what happened. Second element, I said, as soon as people see our manifesto, they will know what we're about and the vision of our society that we have. And I said that will transform the polls. And some of you know this story. We had a meeting, well, Jeremy was touring around the country, but we had a campaign meeting on a Thursday night before we were going to launch the manifesto on the Monday. And Seamus Milne took a call, left the meeting, and then came back in ashen-faced and said, the manifesto's been leaked. And I put my head, I won't say what I said at the time, but I used a common Norfolk expression. I put my head in my hands, and I thought, what the hell's that? What was amazing, for the next 4 days, we had wall-to-wall coverage on our manifesto. And the coverage literally was involved in setting out our ideas, and we shot up 10 points within 48 hours in the opinion polls as a result of that manifesto. Actually, Paul Mason put it about that I'd leaked the manifesto. Well, I haven't, but next time you never know. The reason that manifesto was so successful is that it was crafted in meetings like this all around the country. When Jeremy was touring around the country and large numbers of people were turning up, it wasn't just to listen to Jeremy, it was also to listen to people's ideas. And people turned up and said, these are the problems we face and these are the solutions. We had literally in virtually every town, every city, we had people turning up explaining what the housing crisis was like in their area, the homelessness doubling, the waiting list increasing, young people never having a chance of getting on the property ladder at all. And so the solution, we said, what's the solution? People said very clearly, build homes again. build homes again. We said we'll build 1 million, but we also said half of those will be council homes again, and we'll be proud to build the council. We had so many public sector workers turning up, health workers, nurses, doctors, ancillary workers, young doctors in particular. And we said to them, what is the solution to the crisis that we have in the NHS? And they said very clearly, you end the cuts, but also what we want you to do is end the privatisation. So we said very clearly, one of the things they said to us very clearly as well, is that we're being dragged down by the PFI schemes that have been signed. So when we went to this year's conference, Jeremy made it absolutely clear. Under a Labour government, no more PFIs, and we start bringing them back into public ownership again. Finally, we had so many young people turn up at our meetings. So many young people, for the first time in maybe a generation, on a scale we've not seen before. And they explained what life was like as a young people in this country. Our generation, mine and Jeremy's generation, we always believed that life somehow would be a linear upward rise in living standards and hope for the future. Under the Tories, they've reversed that. They've set that back. For the first time, life expectancy going down. For the first time, young people not having the prospects that even we had when we were young. So we said we'd reverse that. We asked them what to do, and they said, well, we don't want to come out of university with a £55,000 debt. We've done everything asked of us. We've done our A-levels. We've worked hard. We've got our degree. We don't want that debt. So we said, what's the solution? They said very clearly, and we agreed with them. We believe education is a gift from one generation to another, not a commodity to be bought and sold. That's why we will scrap tuition fees once and for all. Yes, we're working hard now, as Jeremy said, to see what we can do about existing debt. Because we know from Andrew Adonis, the minister who set the system up, his own advice, this system is now imploding, it's not working. So some government has got to tackle it in the future. If the Tories don't, we will. That's the way we constructed our manifesto, in discussions and dialogue like this across a whole range of issues. What we're doing now is we're taking that manifesto and every policy in it, we're asking our shadow front-bench teams to devise an implementation manual for each of those manifesto commitments. And yes, if necessary, draft the legislation, have it all on the shelf. We're going through all the costings again, because we published the grey book alongside the manifesto. For every policy, we set a costing and a funding source. I joke about it, but it's true. The only figures in the Tory manifesto were the page numbers. That was all that was there. We set out our policies. We're now revising that, drilling down, going into greater depth, and looking at a range of other funding sources as well. Because we have to prepare now for government. This government, I don't underestimate the Tories' ability to cling on to office for as long as they can. But whenever that challenge comes for the next election, we've got to be prepared with a more radical manifesto, developing those ideas on, but we've got to be prepared to go into government tomorrow if necessary. And that's the work we're doing. So what we'd like you to do, in every constituency now, take the manifesto, start convening meetings within the wider public, within civil society, all those local community organisations, open them up to the public, and start talking about how we implement that manifesto in our town, in our constituency. And in that way, we say this: we will build support through that engagement process for the next general election. But more importantly, we'll build the support not just to win the election, but to sustain us in government. And I just leave you with this. We want people to understand that when we go into government at the next general election, we all go into government. That's what socialist practice is all about. Solidarity.
And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you
you all for being here. Thank you for giving up part of Saturday afternoon to come to a Labour event and discuss politics. I'll tell you what, it's catching. This is the 52nd marginal constituency I've been to since July, and all the meetings are packed, all the events are full. There's a real thirst for political change all over this country. It's demonstrated and represented within the Labour Party, but it's also demonstrated and represented by day-to-day conversations that people are having all over the country. They've had enough of austerity, of cuts, of intergenerational poverty. They've had enough of Tory governments. It's time to us to get rid of them, okay? And this week we put for the fourth time a motion to Parliament on a key aspect of government policy. Straight after the referendum in July 2016, Andy Burnham, on our behalf, put a motion to Parliament calling for all EU nationals to be guaranteed permanent rights of residence with rights of family reunion. It was carried with the vast majority of the Tory MPs abstaining, and for some bizarre reason, Boris Johnson voting with us in our lobby. I saw him in the lobby. I asked him if he was all right, and everything was going well with him. He said, well, you know, old boy, these things are all a bit complicated. So I sort of left it at that, really. What else could you say? And that was carried. Then, in this Parliament, a couple of weeks ago, we put an Opposition Day motion ending the NHS pay cap. Carried, no Tories voting, carried as the will of Parliament. The same day, we put a motion down condemning the rise in student fees. Again, no Tories voting, carried. And this week, we put down a motion to pause universal credit. Tories whipped in the most unbelievable way not to vote. Carried. 299 MPs voting to pause it, none voting against. Is this a government that can be taken seriously, that is confident, that has any views, if they can't even turn up in Parliament to vote on matters of such great importance as universal credit, and then claim, well, it's an opposition motion, therefore it doesn't count? Well, I'll tell you what, everybody out there knows it counts. Everybody out there knows how their Tory MP didn't vote and how their Labour MP and other parties did vote. Make sure nobody ever forgets that. This building we're in today apparently has form. Theresa May apparently came here during the general election campaign. I'll tell you what, I'm not stealing in the building with John, I'm not stealing out of the building, I'm not refusing to talk to anybody. We're here because we want to meet you, and talk to other people as well. We're not afraid of conversation. There's a bit of a difference there. I want also to thank you for all the work that you did in the general election campaign to get the brilliant result you did in Norwich South. Those of you from Cambridge, the result you got in Cambridge, that incredible result you got there, and those that campaigned in so many other constituencies. And the election result was what it was. We put on 3 million votes compared to 2015. We gained constituencies, having been written off by the media and many commentators as being impossible. The fact that we offered a transformational manifesto, the fact that so many millions of people were added to the electoral register thanks to the work of many volunteers, both in and outside the party, and particularly young people, showed that there was something very, very different about the election campaign. And we now have the task of gaining the necessary marginal constituencies to win a general election. And after we've finished here today, John and I are going to Yarmouth, and we're going to gain Great Yarmouth, let's gain Waveney, let's gain a lot of other places. We need to gain these places to get a Labour government. And we're not going to do it if we leave it till whenever this government collapses and the election campaign begins. We're going to do it by being out there all the time, engaging with people on the issues that affect them, but also engaging with our party members about developing our policies, as John has indicated, so that we're strong and ready for that general election whenever it comes. People keep emailing me saying, what's the date of the general election? I have to say, Theresa May doesn't phone me very often. Actually hasn't told me what date the election's going to be. I don't know, any more than anybody else does. But I do know we've got to be ready for it whenever it comes. And we've got to be ready for it organisationally, we've got to be ready for it politically. We showed in the general election what we can do as a party with the manifesto we put forward. We now have to do more detailed work on that manifesto, more detailed work on policy development. And John made the point there that it is about how we do things. It is about localising our manifesto, localising our investment, how we challenge Britvic and Coleman's on their wish, apparently, to close down and leave Norwich, which will cause a rise in unemployment. It will be a loss of manufacturing capability. In the case of Coleman's, will be the loss of a household name that all of us grew up with. My mum always told me Coleman's made their money by the mustard that was left on the plate, not that you consumed. I'm sure she was right. She was a very specific economist and told me not to waste things. And how we develop transport policy across the whole of East Anglia. And John was at a public meeting last night organised by the RMT about rail public ownership. And much as I love railways, and some call me quite unfairly obsessed with railways, it's totally unfair. It's wrong. I can just tell you every branch line. Yes, improvements of rail transport is very important, and investment in railways, particularly electrification and coordination with branch lines, is crucial. But also, actually of even greater importance, is bus services, and rural bus policies are very, very important. And so during the next few months we'll be doing a lot of work on improvement of bus services and broadband access to rural areas, because that is part of what can be an economic generator. And David Drew, who's our Shadow Minister for Rural Affairs, represents Stroud and Gloucestershire. He's tasked with organising a number of rural affairs meetings, starting with a conference on rural policy, so that we do reach out and recognise that actually low wages, poor housing, loss of jobs and job opportunities, and the flight of young people away from rural areas is brought about by the lack of any coherent policy towards rural areas in our country. And we have to be the party that addresses that, so that we see the growth in agricultural development and the processing industries that go with it, quite advanced in this part of the country, less advanced in other parts. We also look at light manufacturing and light industries in rural areas, because we need to have that spread of ideas and spread of economy within this country. There are also huge issues to face on housing policy. I set out in a conference speech some of our ideas on housing policy. Essentially, an incoming Labour government will inherit the most massive housing crisis that has ever been faced. Millions of homes have been sold under right to buy, and now returning in the guise of the private rented sector. In my own constituency, you have the completely ludicrous position where two flats side by side in a block. Flat A, council-owned, permanent, lifetime, secure tenancy, rent £120 a week. Next door, identical flat in a council-owned block, sold under right to buy some years ago, rent £350 a week. How can that possibly be justified in any rational or sensible way? And as a country, we're spending £11 billion a year on rent support for those living in the private rented sector. I would rather spend that kind of money on bricks and mortar to develop new council housing all over the country. So we will be developing our policies, and again, we want you all involved in that. And it would it's good to have sort of open public discussions, tenants groups and so on, about how we develop that policy, and recognise that it's young people who lose out the worst in the housing crisis. They cannot access council housing because there's such a shortage of it, and Norwich was the place with the largest proportion of council housing of any city in the country. Well done, Labour Norwich, for the work it did in developing council housing. But it is also the way in which young people can't afford a deposit in the private rented sector, can't afford to buy and can't access council housing, and so many simply stay in the parental home. Now, we all love our kids, absolutely love our kids, but there comes a time when you wish them to relocate. I can see everybody of a certain age here applauding that. Relocation of 25-year-olds, are we in favour of that? We love them all, but get somewhere to live on your own. So we need to have policies that reach out in those areas. And there's so much else that we need to be working very hard on. Our health service is in crisis, our hospitals are overcrowded, our staff are overworked, the mental health crisis is real, desperate and serious, particularly for young people isolated and alone. And too many young people, particularly young boys, taking their own lives because they suffered stigma, they suffered isolation, they had nowhere to go. And when somebody presents themselves for CAM support, being told to wait 6 months before they get talking therapies, come on. 6 months is unbelievable length of time, and during that period, goodness knows what will happen to you. And so, it was Labour that amended the Health and Social Care Bill, and now Act, to guarantee parity of esteem. This government is not guaranteeing anything like equality of treatment. They don't like the words parity of esteem. I prefer equality of treatment. And that is not happening. And that's why we have somebody around the shadow cabinet table, Barbara Keeley, specifically responsible for social care and mental health, because we take it very, very seriously. A quarter of us are going to face a mental health crisis during our lifetime. Let's reach out to those people, not ignore them. Let's fund our mental health services properly. On Thursday, Alex and I were in Brussels, and I was invited to speak to a very large meeting of socialist parties from all over Europe, both countries within the European Union and outside the European Union, and it was a predominantly young audience, but not exclusively, and I was setting out our views on how we go forward. And Barry Gardner, Keir Starmer and myself took part in a whole series of meetings with officials. It's not an easy subject for the Labour Party, it's not an easy subject for any of us, but it's one we've got to face and got to deal with. Firstly, a referendum happened, a result was obtained. Not the result we wanted, but it was the result that was obtained. Nobody voted to lose their job. We are not walking away from colleagues and friends and comrades in Europe. We're not going to turn this country into a Panama-style tax haven on the shores of Europe. So the message I gave to our friends there was, I come as a friend, I come as a comrade, I come as a fellow socialist, I come to work with you to oppose the far right, wherever they are, in whichever country they are, to oppose the rise of racism, which is happening in too many parts of Europe, and to work together in solidarity. I pointed out that if we accept the neoliberal economic agenda and model, which is about cuts and rolling back the state, which is about greater levels of inequality, which is about deindustrialisation, which does leave communities, be they in Alsace-Lorraine or South Yorkshire, left behind, forgotten and not invested in. If the left, us, the Labour Party, and us as socialists, cannot offer an interventionist alternative that does create jobs, that does give hope, that does build housing, that does fund hospitals, if all we can offer is a sort of pale imitation of neoliberal economics by saying there'll be cuts but not as nasty as their cuts, it doesn't work. That's why I was absolutely determined that our manifesto in the general election would be transformational, would not accept the background, the backdrop of those neoliberal economics. And so we're working with colleagues all across Europe on that, and we will continue to do so. John and I are going to be in Lisbon at the end of November, December, working with the Portuguese government on what they're doing, but above all working with socialists all across Europe, both inside and outside the European Union. I also made it very clear, there are no circumstances where we, as the Labour Party or a Labour government, would walk away from the human rights agenda, walk away from the European Convention on Human Rights, or walk away from the European Court of Human Rights. If I want us to be a Labour government that puts human rights, democracy and peace at the heart of our foreign policy, and that we would legislate to protect workers' rights, consumer rights, environmental protections. We'd be working with people in the future and ensure we have tariff-free trade access to European markets. That's the agenda Keir, Barry and I set out, and we continue to set that out, and we will continue to do so. We are not going to go down the road of some sweetheart trade deal with Donald Trump, which involves the destruction of workers' rights in southern states in the USA, or the destruction of workers' rights across this side of the Atlantic. That's the way we take these things forward. I'll finish on this so we've got time for questions and discussion. Our party was founded by people with enormous vision, great bravery, who suffered enormous hardship. They did it because they could see the crudity and the cruelty of both the power imbalance in industrialised Britain, but also the power imbalance in rural Britain. The strongest area of agricultural trade unionism was East Anglia, was Norfolk, where there was that strength of determination to bring about justice, to bring about workers' rights, and to provide things like a free health service, which we achieved, and the principles of social security. All these things are under threat. All these things are under threat because we have a government that is not really very interested in protecting the social agenda that we have, and we have a government that isn't seriously interested in investing in the future either. With John running our economic strategy, we will get investment in manufacturing industry. We will want to develop increasing high-tech industries across Britain. We want to provide decent education opportunities for everybody. John talked about student fees, and he's right, and I absolutely agree with him. The other side of it is, I want us to put resources, £4.5 billion, into preschool facilities for children, because you know what happens? I was in a primary school in my constituency yesterday, and they were telling me what it's like when they bring a 2-year-old in who's coming from difficult housing, difficult family situation, and not as socially developed as other 2-year-olds. They've got to get them to sort of catch up. They've got to help them, they've got to nurture them, they've got to give them that support.